Do please take your seats. It's an absolute honour and a privilege to be with you this evening. I know when preachers normally say that, what they really mean is, I'd much rather be at home with a cold beer and a bag of Doritos in the Champions League, but I really mean it's a privilege to be with you tonight, looking at what we're going to be looking at together. And I'll tell you why. My grandpa, I love the bones of that man. Born in 1924 in London, evacuated to Wisbech during the war. In the holidays, he and his three younger siblings would cycle from Cambridgeshire back to London to see their parents. When he grew up, he went to study chemistry at Imperial, and when he finished that, he went to work for a year on a whaling ship in the Far East, when that kind of stuff was still all okay. He came back and he married, and he went to work in Algeria for a period, and he came back and they had a family, and kids grew up and their kids had us. And I remember Grandpa, I remember their enormous garden, I remember him countless hours playing football and cricket in their garden. I remember Grandpa chasing me and my younger brother around the garden playing racing cars. We'd have little crash helmets and he would have a colander on his head. I remember he taught me to play chess. He taught me how to fly a kite. I remember having philosophical discussions at about the age of 9 as he stood leaning on his bedroom window smoking a cigarette. I remember his shovel-like hands. I remember his white, bristly beard. Yesterday, I was at his funeral in Manchester. And today, I'm at another funeral with you. It's Lazarus's funeral. I know the sight of tear-stained cheeks. I know the sight of an elderly widow supported too weak to stand, stretching out an arthritic hand to touch his coffin. I know the sounds of the suppressed sobs. I know the smell of pine and flowers. I know the taste of hot, salty tears that for whatever reason just won't stop coming. I want to invite you this evening to join me at this funeral. You know this passage, many of you better than I do. You've preached on it, you know the theological implications and the systematics, and you know all that, but I fear sometimes we go there too fast. Familiarity breeds something or other, and I want to invite us to slow down. I want us to inhabit the emotion and the strangeness of this story as if we were the disciples, as if we were with it, experiencing it all for the very first time. Those first eyewitnesses, what would we have heard? What would we have seen? What would we have touched, tasted, and smelled? Can we do that this evening? Will you indulge me in doing that this evening? I mean, it's tough because we're doing it anyway, but this is what I want us to do this evening. I want us to get into the story and experience it afresh. And what an extraordinary story it is. It begins with the news coming to Jesus that his friend Lazarus is sick, which leads us to kind of cryptic saying number 1 of Jesus here, where he says, Jesus says, verse 4, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. What does he mean? What is he talking about? And then Jesus decides he's going to stay there 2 more days. What happened is, have we forgotten about Lazarus? Are we getting on with other business now? Eventually Jesus says, okay, let's go now. And the disciples say, but it's dangerous. People are out to get you. They want to kill you. And then we get cryptic saying number 2. Jesus says, well, look, it's all right. If we walk by day, we walk by the world's light, we'll be fine. It's when he walks by night that he stumbles. There's something about light and darkness. And then cryptic saying 3, as Jesus said, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to wake him up. The disciples say, well, so what if he's fallen asleep? If he's fallen asleep, he'll get better. Jesus said he's not fallen asleep, he's dead. Well, which is it? Is he asleep or is he dead? And if he's simply asleep, we don't need to wake him. And if he's dead, why are we going? Thomas just kind of throws his lot in at the end of it and just says, well, let's all go. We might as well all die. What does he mean? What is he thinking? I'm sure it's only me that experiences this. On a Friday night, often my wife and I will sit down to watch a film. I love my wife. She's an amazing woman, but she's a pain in the neck to watch a film with. Because after about 20, 25, 30 minutes, she's there going, well, who are they? And what are they doing? And why do they say that? And where did he come from? I don't understand what's going on. And I have to say, it's okay. It'll make sense in the end. Just watch it till the end. Let's just watch it. All the bits will come together. Just me that has this, or you know what I'm talking about? This is a bit like that, isn't it? The opening bit is just confusing. It's odd. It's strange. There's cryptic sayings. And Jesus seems confused and in two minds, and the disciples seem confused. And we have to stick with the story and trust that eventually it will all come together fine. Jesus arrives, and he finds that Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. 4 days, and three groups of people come out to meet Jesus. The first is Martha. Martha comes out. She heard Jesus was coming. She went out to meet him. And she says, verse 21, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. If only you'd been here. Jesus says, here's a card, here's some flowers. I'm so sorry for your loss. No. Cryptic saying number 4. Jesus says, your brother will rise again. Martha says, I know he'll rise again. I know about the final resurrection. All good Jews know about the final resurrection. I know he's going to rise again, but that doesn't help me now. The spiritual platitudes are not much help right now because it hurts so much. And Jesus said, another cryptic saying, I am the resurrection and the life. What on earth does that mean? He who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe? So, yes. Yeah, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God who is to come into the world. But what does it mean? My brother's dead, and you're telling me you're the resurrection and the life. And I know about the end resurrection, but what do you mean? She goes and she gets Mary, and Mary comes with a crowd of people, and they're all weeping, and Mary too falls at Jesus' feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, if you'd been here, if only you'd been here, my brother would not have died. And then the third group of people in verse 37 come and say, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? 3 times, 3 separate groups of people come with basically the same, well, is it accusation? Is it despair? What is it? Lord, if only you had been here. But you weren't. And he's dead. Now there's nothing that can be done. Life is full of if onlys, isn't it? If only. If only the Titanic hadn't made the decision to go full steam to try and get to New York in record time. Who knows? If only JFK's head had been 1 foot further forwards. If only they had goal line technology at the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, we'd have still got thrashed, but, who knows? If only. If only I'd been on the train that I was supposed to be on July the 7th, 2007 into London to go to my college course, which had been cancelled. Who knows? If only. I heard the story recently of a firefighter who was involved in some of the rescue of people when the Twin Towers came down. And the firefighter tells a story of he went into one kind of mid-level office, and there's a man tucked in the corner typing away on his computer as the room fills with smoke. He says, you've got to get out of here. He says, I just need to send this one email. I just need to finish this deal. Mate, the world is falling down around you. He said, no, leave me. I just got to finish this. I'll come. Just leave me. The third time, you need to come now. He says, just leave me alone. If only the man had just an ounce of perspective. Who knows, perhaps a wife would have a husband and children would have a father. If only. Jesus, if only. It's kind of part accusation. It's part despair. If only you had been here, Jesus, but you weren't. Now there's no hope. What does Jesus do in response, in reaction to all this? Jesus, verse 33, when Jesus saw the weeping, and the Jews who come along with it also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit. It's not strong enough translation. You know, the Greek word has that sense of anger, it's rage, it's hot grief that Jesus feels and experiences at the sight. Martha's weeping, Mary's weeping, the crowd's weeping, Jesus is weeping. Can you feel the grief of the situation? You know, the very first funeral I had to do, I did for Samuel. Samuel was born on the 5th of May, and it was very quickly apparent that things were not good at all. He had a serious heart condition, and he probably wasn't going to make it. The church prayed like crazy. I cried every day that week. And he died on the 8th of May. And I was asked to take the funeral, first ever funeral. Combination of immense grief and immense terror, all bound up. I knew what I was supposed to do. I knew I was supposed to get people around the grave and tell the undertakers when we were ready for the coffin. And I said, yes, thank you, gentlemen. And as I was expecting 4 burly blokes with a huge coffin turn around, I hadn't even thought about it, not even thought about it. And the guy with his back towards me turns round holding a little white shoebox. Can you feel the grief? You feel the pain. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Problem of Pain, which was really an apologetic for the whole issue of suffering and evil. And then his wife died of cancer. And he wrote another book called A Grief Observed. And these were his opening words. No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid, the same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. There is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, yet I want the others about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty, if only they talk to one another and not to me. There are moments, most unexpectedly, when something inside me tries to assure me that I don't really mind so much. Not so very much after all. Love is not the whole of a man's life. And then comes a sudden jab of red-hot memory. And all this common sense vanishes like an ant in the mouth of a furnace. Do you feel the grief? Albert Camus wrote a famous novel called La Peste, The Plague, set in a town called Oran in the 1940s when the plague breaks out, bubonic plague. What starts as 2s and 3s dying is quickly 30 people a day dying of the plague. And the two kind of chief characters, if you like, in Camus' Plague are the doctor and the priest. You see, and the priest says, this is judgment from God. Death is this judgment from God, and we must repent and resign ourselves to what God is doing. At one point he says to consult a doctor will be a contradiction of faith in the God whose hand is over all of this. And then there's the doctor. The doctor cannot believe in a God who would send plagues who would cause such suffering. And he and his colleague fight against the plague. They do everything they can to fight against the plague. And what Camus wants us to do is to choose. Camus says, which one is it going to be? You can have your faith, but you must just accept stoically the suffering and the pain of the world. Or you can show humanitarian concern and care, but you must abandon your faith, else you will be fighting against God himself. Is this what's going on here? Is this what Jesus experienced? I mean, Jesus feels this anger, this rage, this grief when these hot tears come. Does Jesus feel the weight of their accusation? Does he feel helpless? Has he got a crisis of identity or confidence or even faith? Does he stand looking at these grieving people? I think they're right. If only I'd been here. But I wasn't. And now there's nothing I can do. And then we come to the final part of the story. Jesus, once more deeply moved, he comes to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance, and he says, "Take away the stone." What is he saying? Is he mad? Can you imagine being one of the disciples? He said, "Take the lid off the coffin. Take away that stone." Jesus, are you sure? The family not suffered enough? Can you not see the pain and the tears and the weeping? You want them to take away? What are you doing? This is kind of Jeremy Clarkson-esque bad taste. Which one of Lazarus' cousins is going to punch Jesus first for suggesting that they would take away the stone? "But Lord," said Martha, "by this time there is a bad odour," as the Authorised Version says. "He stinketh." He's been there 4 days. The rot has literally set in. Decay, decomposition, rotting flesh, the stench and the smell of death. And Jesus wants to expose that. Jesus says, "Did I not tell you that if you believe you would see the glory of God?" So they take away the stone. And then Jesus prays a prayer. And then Jesus says the 3 words which create the most tension in the entire story. He says, "Lazarus, come out." What if it doesn't work? What then? What do you say then? They're dead. Jesus is dead. They're dead. What if it does work? What if it does work? What happens if it does work? Jesus says, "Lazarus, come out." It's even just 5 seconds of silence is awkward, deafening. How long did they wait? How long did it take? They're looking at the tomb, they're looking at Jesus, they're looking at the disciples, back at Jesus, back at the tomb. What's going to happen? And then the jaw-dropping, soul-shaking, earth-shattering conclusion. The dead man came out. His hands and his feet wrapped with strips of linen. The mummy comes forth, cloth around his face, and Jesus says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." What happened then? Who spoke first? What do they talk about over their chips and gravy that night? What do the people do? Who's passed out? Well, some followed Jesus, some reported him. But you see, then we're at the end of the film. We're at the end of the film, and then all the pieces kind of make sense. And we can go back and watch the film again, and we understand all the bits. We understand when Jesus says early on that I'm going to be glorified, verse 4 in this. We now know what that means. We know what it means, perhaps a little bit more, when Jesus talks about darkness and light. We know what Jesus means when he says, "Lazarus, he just sleeps." He's dead, but he sleeps. We know what it means when Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life." He is the author and the giver of life. In raising Lazarus, he demonstrates that he has the power over death, the power to bring back the dead to life. He can give life. He's the author, the giver of life, the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. He is nothing less than the Creator himself. And then perhaps we can understand Jesus' rage, Jesus' anger at what he sees before him. And we can see that Camus is wrong. Camus has set up a false dilemma. Because here we have the Creator angry at something in the creation without being angry at himself. You see that? The Creator enraged with something in the creation without ever being angry at himself. B.B. Warfield perhaps captures this best in his book, The Emotional Life of Our Lord. He writes this: "The distress of Mary and her companions enraged Jesus because it brought poignantly home the evil of death, its unnaturalness, its violent tyranny. Inextinguishable fury seizes upon him. His whole being is perturbed. It is death that is the object of his wrath. And behind death, him who has the power of death. His soul is held by rage. The raising of Lazarus thus becomes not an isolated marvel, but a decisive instance of Jesus' conquest of death and hell. What John does for us in this encounter is uncover to us the heart of Jesus as he wins for us salvation, not in cold unconcern, but in flaming wrath against the foe. Under the impulse of these feelings, he has wrought out our redemption, says Warfield. We're now in a place to understand something more, aren't we, about who is this man? Is he mad? Has he just gone bonkers in terms of the way he behaves and what he does? Is he bad and cruel and manipulative? Or, as Lewis puts it, is he God? Is the one who conquers death, who has the power over life itself. He is the author and the giver of life, the resurrection and the life. He is nothing less than God in human flesh. And there's something to us in there about the placement of this story. This is the hinge in John's story. It's the seventh sign. Just before this, chapter 10, Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. But not only that, I only lay it down so I can take it up again. And in chapter 12, the wheels are set in motion for that kind of roller coaster ride towards his own death. But we know how that story is going to end because of the hinge of John's Gospel in chapter 11. We've seen that Jesus has the power to conquer death. Death cannot hold him. He will conquer death. He will rise again. He will win salvation for us. This is not only the hinge of John's story, it's the hinge of all stories, isn't it? It's the hinge of every story. It's the hinge of the human story. C.S. Lewis writes about this when he speaks of resurrection. He says this. He says, to be sure, it feels wintry enough still, but often in the very early spring it feels like that. 2,000 years are only a day or two by this scale. A man really ought to say, the resurrection happened 2,000 years ago in the same spirit in which he says, I saw a crocus yesterday. Because we know what is coming behind the crocus. The spring comes slowly down this way, but the great thing is the corner has been turned. What does all of this mean for us? What does it mean for us as Christians? Well, at the most basic level, it just gives us great personal assurance, doesn't it? My grandfather, he never believed any of this. We talked and we exchanged letters, and I tried to give him books and things like that to read. He never bought any of this, and his last wish was to have a humanist funeral. One of the things that a humanist funeral does well is that celebration of God's common grace in a life. They wouldn't talk about it in those terms. But the tragedy of the humanist funeral and the bit where I'm afraid to say I just fell apart was the end. Because there's nothing to say. They just say, it's time to say goodbye. No hope, no light, no resurrection, no heaven, nothing. The most they can say is, well, they lived a good life, but even then you say, according to whose standard exactly? There's nothing to say. Not so with us. Not so with us. We have resurrection and a life because of what Jesus does here and later in his own death and resurrection. Do you know, a recent survey reckoned that 49% of those surveyed by the University of London believe there is definitely or probably life after death. But only 31% have said that they believe in God, with or without some doubts, which means there's 20% of people who believe in life after death but have no idea how they might gain it. When I was at school, they used to make us as I guess many of you would have had to do the same, make us play rugby through the winter. Now, God did not give me a physique for the game of rugby, but nonetheless, we were there in the winter with our short shorts and skinny purple legs and knees knocking together and frozen hands. And there was a kid in our year called Pete Hennessy. And Pete Hennessy was, by the time he was 13, he was 6'4". He was built like an outside toilet, full chest hair and beard. He's 13 years old. He's a freak. And I would stand out on the wing and I'd pray, Lord, don't let them pass the ball to me. Just leave me alone for these 45 minutes. If you were against Pete Hennessy, there was a very real threat that you could quite literally be torn limb from limb. But if you were on Pete's side, well, the game of rugby was really very simple indeed. You picked the ball up, you gave it to Pete, and then everyone filed in behind, clinging a little bit of his shirt. And he would smash through the enemy lines and he'd take us all over the line to victory. Jesus does that for us. Jesus does that for us. He's the resurrection and the life. He has smashed the enemy line. He has broken through the enemy line. He has conquered death. And he's come out the other side, which means if we in faith grab onto the back of his shirt, we know that he will get us through death. Because he got himself through death. As Richard said, some of you will be feeling beaten down and discouraged. Some of you won't be looking forward to going home. Some of you will be struggling with loved ones who have a terminal illness, chronic suffering, a crushing diagnosis, long-term mental health problems. Life can be incredibly painful. And death is an undeniably painful word. But it is not necessarily the last word. For Christians, it is not at all the last word. In fact, resurrection is but the beginning for us. This is strength for today and a bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine and 10,000 besides. This is no power of hell. No scheme of man can ever, it's like a Taylor Swift song, ever pluck you or me out of his hands. And what about for under shepherds? What does it say for us? I read in the summer Eugene Peterson's book, The Pastor. I'd recommend it. The gold is as brilliant as the strange stuff is strange. If you've read Eugene Peterson, you'll know what I mean by that. But he talks about a period. He's reflecting on a lifetime in ministry. And he talks about a period he calls the Badlands. A decade of ministry life where it felt dead. It felt like being around Lazarus. It felt like it was fruitless. It felt like a wilderness. It was dry. And it was barren. And on reflection, he said, it was hard to get over the disappointment that God had not made an exception in my case. He didn't seem to call nice, courteous, accomplished, alert people to my church. And then he said, it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. Faced with 1,000 disconnected pieces spread out on the table, you know that if you stay with it long enough, all those pieces will finally fit together and make a beautiful picture. Most pastors never stay with it long enough. Maybe they conclude there'd been a mistake in the packaging, that many pieces have been left out. Peterson talks about the refining fire of non-performance. He says there's a lot going on when you don't think anything is going on. He says, I learned to stay in touch with people in despair, to know them by name, and to wait, and to wait, and to wait for resurrection. He says, I do not want to be so impatient with the mess that I'm not around to see the miracle. I wonder how many of Lazarus's relatives and families left on day 3. Day 3 is, you stayed around a while, get home a bit earlier to the wife and the kids, spare yourself some of the misery and the grief, but you've no story to tell. If you're in the Badlands, and there's a time when it's right to move on, but perhaps Would you stay around another day? Would you hang around the tomb, the barrenness and the wilderness for one more day? And see if in the mess and the death, a miracle of new life shows up. Abraham Herschel, the rabbi, said, I never asked God for success. I asked for wonder. What can be more full of wonder than being an under-shepherd of the one who is the resurrection and the life, the one who brings life out of death in individuals, in communities, in churches, and one day in our world. There's nothing more wonderful than that, is there? G.K. Chesterton wrote a poem about Lazarus, and I've paraphrased it and adapted it, and I'll close with this. Doubters pour forth scorn on God. A crutch for the weak, they say. Wits and wags are quick to mock the futility of faith. The crowd so love to jeer and sneer, with taunts they're quick to give. But all their words are naught to me. For I am Lazarus, and I live. Should we pray? Lord Jesus, the author and the giver of life, the resurrection and the life, we praise you that this account in the life of Lazarus is but a foretaste of what you are to do for yourself and what you've done for countless others through the years and what you will do for us. It is because you took up your own life that we are here tonight, that we can pray to you and praise you. It's because you took up your life that we can have that strength for today and the bright hope for tomorrow. Holy Spirit, would you put strength in our every stride, that we may prove ourselves those servants, good and faithful. May we depend utterly on you and your resurrection power in our own lives and in the lives of our churches. For your glory, for your renown, for your name's honor, for your sake. Amen.